welcome everyone. And Henrik, you're in the slopes, so that's why you don't have a camera on, right? Henrik Leonhufvud. You're in Chamonix?
Yes, but we have a little bit slow upload speed here.
Yeah. So, and as we have started push out invite for the MDriven summit that we're gonna hold in 16th of March, and we haven't really set the program as of yet, but maybe we could ask of you, Damien, because we're gonna ask everyone to send in sort of a small, like a greeting, just to set the scene that MDriven is used in geography-wise many places, and also many type of businesses. So we sort of would like a short summary of who you are, what you do, and where you are, and your kind of business.
The little video.
Yeah. So like a 5-minute thing or something like that. We try to collect those from around different places, and then we will have some live setups as well. I think that would be a good. Then we can get people to talk amongst themselves in the meeting. Then.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to do it.
Yeah, great.
It starts 4 in the afternoon in Sweden, so I guess.
Maybe you should just record something ahead of time, and then you can watch it online if you want. But I guess it's better if those that are not present just provide video material or some kind of presentation that are there present can just present.
Okay. Yeah, I was telling Lars when I first signed on, I don't know if you caught it, that I would have strongly considered coming, but I'm in a conference at the exact same time in California. But if you're doing it next year, I would certainly try hard to make it happen. But yeah, it's just a quick video of what we do, how we do it, our market.
Because I think it's really interesting for everyone to see that there are radically different businesses using the same stuff, and that of course the same think patterns and logic can be applied to almost any kind of business problem.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to think through a good way to demonstrate how the tool solves the problems.
Yeah. Cool. So what I had on the agenda to show tonight was some changes that we did to ServerSideJobs and how to maintain them and make sure that they work. So I'm gonna share my screen. Like that. And so the server-side jobs are, when you think of them, it's sort of what gives your system a pulse, because as long as you have a system which somewhere in there is a database with a lot of information, and you have clients using the client tools that you have provided for them, but there's still nothing going on if there aren't any clients there. So to give your system some kind of life of its own and a pulse, the server-side jobs are excellent for this. Sort of watching data that takes on certain states and transform that data to something different. And there's a lot of work that we do with server-side jobs. And to get server-side jobs going, I'm just going to start my default model against the built-in servers or the local servers. I'm gonna take this server 6 and just start that up, and I guess I had already started it, so I think it's down here. I'm gonna close those so that we get it to work with start those servers like that. So we have one MDriven server and one turnkey server, and that's okay. And bring in a browser. Yeah. And since this is a local server, it's logged in with the A account and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The same as always. I'm gonna upload this model. Yeah, first I'm gonna push this one to use this local server, so it's localhost 502.512, like here. And ServerSideJobs. Wow, that was big, too big for the screen. I'm gonna reduce it. So basically, any view model can be a server-side job. And just until very recently, you clicked an action here to make the server-side criteria available, and they popped up in a different window. And that was problematic in many ways, because you had to know about it, and you could miss that it had server-side criteria. So we need to put those more into your what do you say, site? Yeah, into your site.
Into your face.
Yeah, into your face. So now once you enable them, it pops up here under actions with a fold thing here. So you get the whole dialog over here, and then you have the server-side criterias. And what can the server-side criterias be? Well, we have a criteria to, that was also way too big. I downscaled my screen to make it fit with the video and being readable for you guys. So this is mounted in thing, so let's go for thing, all instances, and select those that has a some string equal to this, just any value, and imagine that you check a state or some other kind of data. So this filters out a certain amount of thing objects, of course, and each thing object will be instantiated on the server using this view model, and then the server will just push any buttons that are available in order on this view model. So let's make an action column over here that does something like setting the self some string. Gonna just append a X behind it, and then of course it won't be part of the criteria anymore.
So Hans, when I think of server-side jobs, I don't think of things that are working inside a tool like our inside MDriven. I think of server-side jobs as stuff SQL Server is doing or something.
Yeah, so that's usually how it's done, and it's usually done as small satellite applications that typically some new guy is responsible to do, because everyone else in the project hasn't got the time, and this sort of feels like an isolated thing that that guy can do, and all of a sudden you have lost track of the maintenance of your project, and you don't know what the hell it does. Hopefully it works, but when it stops working, you have a hell of a time finding the code. Everything
That's
like
totally
this.
separate and
Yeah, and it's always out of reach, and we want to mitigate that, because that was one of it's such a common problem that we always have these issues when we produce systems, that we need to do things server side, and we need to import stuff from other databases, we need to export stuff to other databases, we need to call REST APIs every hour to refresh something, or every minute to refresh something.
right.
There's tons of things.
I don't. You started replying, Hans, very quickly. I don't know if Damien just meant server side in the sense of the word, because that's of course a problem. I mean, everything is server side almost today. So what is the server side here? So maybe, to be more specific, this would be to say MDriven server side, because it's actually executing inside the MDriven server, not in the turnkey, which is the front end.
Yeah.
But it's also a server. So this is always, and the SQL server is a server. So everything is servers. And
Yeah, I have a huge aversion to anything that's, when someone says server side or someone starts talking about SQL, I shut up quickly, because if it's not working through our tools, it's not respecting our business logic, and it's not part of our main system. And I've seen situations where, I don't know, somebody builds some report that manipulates or pulls the database directly to, I don't know, send out an annual statement to shareholders or something stupid like that. And I think Hans is right that it tends to start as the new guy does it because it's easy, and it's just this dumb little thing, and it's a very bad place to go.
Yeah, and it completely locks up the whole evolving feature of the database. Yeah. It really clamps everything down with a ton of steel, so nothing can be moved anymore. That's why this is. Just to point out that Hans is now showing like the full way of running with view models, but there is also this thing that we called now it's out of my head, the sync.
A sync ticket.
A sync ticket, which is like a special case of this. So it's a specific use case of using server-side things, where you can very easily, you can download that example from the wiki. It's a very neat way of integrating things that should be executed server-side, in this case, and in the MDriven server, but are tiny and may not need the whole thing, because I'm sure Hans will show it or will point it out soon, that you can do reporting and stuff from this, right? But sometimes you also just want to trigger a state machine from one state to another, or respond to something and don't want to put it in the UI because you want to, for example, move several state machines, and it's better to do it in one orchestrated thing on the server. You can just say to the server, do this async. What it actually does is that it has this server-side job that runs all these small things quickly.
And one popular thing that everyone is talking about nowadays is serverless. So running things serverless, which is actually not serverless. It's just a generic server that you put up some code and post it somewhere, and then there's a generic server that knows what to do with it and handles it for it. So you didn't need to own that server. It just was done for you, and then you get the result back. And the feel for you is that you don't have a server, so that means it was serverless. But of course there's a server because the CPU is placed somewhere else. So this is, and the MDriven server is very much picking up on that idea that being generic, you can put anything model driven on the MDriven server and it can perform stuff for you. And once you can do that, you can break down long-running transactions that you normally would have in the UI. It might be complex, it might be 10,000 things that needs to move from one state to another, and then when they are done you should check half of them to move to a third state. Absolutely, but don't do it in the UI thread. Don't do it in the UI ever. Just postpone it to send it up to the server and have the UI watch as it plays out, and that makes any system scale. So what I did was to take a UI that was actually meant to be a normal screen initially, but I abused it a bit and said that it could run on the server as well. So what this will do is will load one thing if the criteria is fulfilled, mainly the sum string equals to this with capitals, and then the server will push this button, and this button will append an X, and then everything will be saved. So if I upload this model now and also update the ServerSideJobs definitions to make this happen, I can just make sure that that was evolved, and then I guess I would find my turnkey server at this address, and going back to the browser to see if that's awake. Yeah, maybe. So if I look at this and says that this is named this, and once I save it, my server-side job will be able to, well, maybe I forgot to do one thing to set the how often should it check this. Well, it's gonna check it every 20 seconds, and it has no limits on how many of these it will find, and it will work on them in turn. Oops, there it was. Now it's this X instead. So as I'm gonna call this, and not this. So we can see that it works, and our UI thread is totally freed up, but this will still happen for us in the background. Like that. Now these are all this X. And what was a problem until recently was to, when these things go wrong, how do we understand how they go wrong and why they go wrong? Several improvements in the recent builds will help us to discover when things go wrong and what's the root cause. And for the server-side jobs in the MDriven server UI, we have a list of all the, well, here they are called periodic actions, and that's sort of a glitch in the, and also the colors here are way off. But what we can do here is to firstly we can go to the view one thing job and see whenever it's executed. So we can see here that it's executed every other or every 20 seconds. It's a red dot here, and if this dot would be very long, it represents the time it takes to execute the job. So really not much time is spent on this. We can continue to walk in here and see the log for this job, and it has tried to execute, or it has executed this and returned 0 results, so there was nothing to do. If there were something to do, that these came back to X like this, we would expect to see that, whoa, it found something. It was touched one object, saved one object to fix this. So I guess this is turned back to X again. So that's one way to actually see that the server-side job is going. But the main problem that at least I was left with was that sometimes the criteria are really complex to get to know which objects to work on, and how can we help you to debug that. For that we added a criteria window over here, so I must excuse myself for the coloring here, it's way off. So there's a new view that actually brings up all the stuff that from your definition, and this is from your definition, and this is the SQL that will be generated and actually executed against the database. Since I'm running a local server, I have the A0 appendix on the tables. So I can sort of execute and see there are no result sets from this. But what if I change this to this X instead and execute? Well, then you would have result sets. Then you would have 3 objects. If the criteria was this, then you would have 3 objects. So since I can change this in real time here, I'm not changing the definition of the server-side job, only the view here in MDriven server. This will help me to discover issues with my OCLPS construction, because I have seen that these get really complex. You should take all the objects in state X, but only if they're changed within 24 hours and only if it's a Sunday. So the criteria can be complex, and you can have variables and logic to set values to those variables that you then can use over here. So now we know that if the criteria was like this instead, then we would get 3 objects. And what we can do now is to actually circumvent all the automation and execute on this root object to have the server do its thing just as if it would work normally having this criteria. So on this object I can execute it, and as I execute I see the small log from what's happening once this is running. And since the criteria was that it should append an X, I can see that these grow to get more X's. So that was the one that I hit. So that makes it much easier to follow along to see what the server does with the server-side jobs, I think. And I was really happy when this came about, because of course there were actual things that I had issues with that I needed to debug, and having implemented this was the easiest way to debug them that I could think of. What do you think about this, Lars? Lars is silent. Lars is muted.
Oh, I think I've used it because this isn't entirely new, right?
Yes, this is brand new.
What?
So,
but there is some other debugger then you can run OCLPS.
Yeah. But this is within the MDriven server, and it brings out the criteria and makes it possible to execute for one single root object. And I think, Leonhufvud, it will help you as well, don't you think? has gone skiing. He's mute.
Yeah, I think we might use it at Finansinspektionen. We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. So
execute one job manually. Yeah. Oh.
Of course, we have this run now button, but that just slipstreams the job into the normal queue, and then you have to look for it amongst all other jobs that are currently running, and it will get prioritized, and we might have an issue finding it. So as your system grows and you have not 2 or 3 here, you have like 55 different aspects of stuff that's gonna happen periodically. You can lose track of things, and this will definitely help you to get back on track. Yo-ho!
You had the option in the debugger, right? That you could pick a server-side job and then execute it in the debugger.
Yes.
But that was kind of messy because you got all of these expressions in a row, and then but this is much cleaner, easier.
So Emily, like this, you press the play button and say that you're gonna connect to the MDriven server, and then you start the system, and then you start the debugger. And then you could like find the routes that you want to work on.
Yeah, but you could also like just pick a server-side job up there in the left corner.
Yeah, but I guess you need a route. Like this.
No, you could just
view one thing, and
then you get all of the expressions.
And then you get the expressions like this.
But if it's a big one. And it's a bit messy.
So and this also wouldn't work exactly as on the server, because from here you can't sort of send emails, and you can't do SQL import. Most likely you can't do that because you don't have access and stuff like that. So it's good that this way of executing the job is extremely similar to how the job will actually execute on its own in the server.
Have you had the time to make this so it even picks up an exception?
Yeah, if you guide me through it, because I haven't got that in my head. But what we can do is to go to the wiki and OnException.
Because that's one of the really tough things to find what's going on.
Yeah. So there are a couple of ways to make it easier for the server-side job to give information about failure states. So you could have a sort of a view model column called error info, and then you would need a attribute that could receive that error info in your data. Or you can have an exception info, and you can these are not mutually exclusive, but the exception info will give you the dump of the call stack if you have it. And then there is an OnException, which is an action that will execute if the server sees that your server-side job has problems. So let's go with this error info. I'm gonna just make room for it here. I'm gonna add an attribute.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Hans, but I think that the OnException action is actually run in a separate commit, so that you can do things in the OnException action that actually saved? Because that's always a tricky thing, right? Where do you save something when you actually don't want the main thing saved? You don't want to mess with the database when your job was running, but you want to be able to save what happened. And
Yeah.
I think it does that.
So why I did it like this, to call them attribute 1, was just to prove a point that your stuff in where you actually store the data doesn't need to be named any special way. It's just the view model columns that needs to be named. Yeah, if I can do it right. Exception info. No, error info. So these two columns, normally when you have server-side jobs, you turn off the placing hint because those are annoying, and then you don't have to make sure that your things doesn't collide. But let's do it like this. So if the server will find an error with our job, let's add an action here that will produce an error. And it's gonna take self sum int and divide it by 0. Oh, maybe that would be dumb because then we can't see when it. Let's divide 20 with sum int. So if sum int is 0, it will fail with some exception. Right. I think this will do. Let's try it. So we're gonna upload this model and update the server-side actions. And the database was extended with some place to hold this information. And let's see where we are here. Since the server-side job will only run if it's this in the attribute 1, I'm gonna change. Well, we can go into this and see. Let's make this 0. And save. And if this one will be running soon, we can see, follow it here to see. I think it was just run over here. So let's go and check the log. Let's go and see.
This X is there.
Yeah, so it didn't have a problem with running this without an exception. Wonder why. Because if it should divide this with, let's just see. If this would happen to I'm gonna reread this model because we evolved it. So let's take this one. And we can do things like, I'm gonna drag this root up to here and drop it on here. And then I can watch that with this root and press action 2. Isn't that illegal? I'm gonna take this route and drag it over here to self. Did I do it wrong? Self 20 through. That becomes it. Eternity. So give me something that produces an error. Yeah, I know. We can take most things in MDriven are created to not create exceptions and errors, but what can we think of?
Divide by 0?
Yeah, divide by 0
what we did.
Is just returning eternity. Infinity. Yeah.
Yeah. But also if you add a string that becomes too long, then that was a really sneaky one.
Yeah. Right. So since...
And it crashes when it saves to the database.
Yeah. Correct. So let's see if we change... well, let's set the date time to... because this is the compact database, and then... so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So this is 50, and 100, 150, 200. So this is 200, and 400 and 600, because I think the compact allows for 510 in the default string. So that won't work because, well, it will work in memory, but once we save it, we will get a truncation error.
Hopefully. It's difficult to get it to.
Like that, and then back to the application, and need to trigger this for at least one. So once it should run this and fail big time. Well, it failed.
Oh, there.
It failed with, well, this length was 664. And douche. It's exception. So OnException action column not found. Yeah, so that was the action that that is correct. That was, we didn't add that one. Is that required? So maybe it is.
I usually use this, you know, like you have a send email. You can see that there are examples for it too. So you have the OnException, and then you move to a failed state. And 3 times you try again, and then you fail completely, and then the user can have a look. Or the admin can have a look.
So the OnException action is different and won't be called normally until there's an exception. Just gonna upload that. And so this is still this, and the MDriven server is running. Found action column OnException, trying to execute. Exception info set was okay. Trying to set. So it's trying to tell us, but it fails somehow. Yeah, we need to get better examples on this. If an error occurs in a server-side view model, we will set error info, exception info, and lastly, call OnException. But it doesn't do that.
It does.
It works in reality, but not.
Yeah, it's been running for. I think this has been running for years, so it works in reality. I don't know what's wrong here.
No, there's something that we missed, but good that I'm gonna get back and clarify how this is done to make it.
So speaking of string length errors, which I actually bumped into one this morning, ironically. Does MDriven do any auto truncating? Like, is there? I was kind of hoping the attributes would have a new property that would, be auto truncate or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's not possible in ECO.
Yeah, normally in the UI we limit all the widgets that are presented to the user to only be able to enter the set amount of length. So in the model we like for
yeah, and you can also do the tricky thing here is that sometimes if it was auto truncating all the time, you wouldn't find maybe the problem that you have caused. So we have decided for now at least that this is like a UI thing, not a model thing. If you want the model to truncate it, you can just with an operator see how long it should be, and then you just truncate it. So that's easy in YAL. And so if you also make a derived settable attribute, you can cut things model side, I would say. But otherwise, we have implemented it as a UI interface thing to not hide, and everything is savable, but it's actually not saving what you expected to save.
Yeah.
So
I would probably prefer to have both.
Yeah, so the thing is that on model level you need to explain the length so that the database can be constructed, and also that length is then set to limit the user from adding more values. But programmatically there's really no limit in memory to have something that's longer than what's available in the database. So what you can do is to have this value initially, and then you do some more operations that reduce the value, and that should be okay. You would be really confused if it would be because there's really no limitation as of yet.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. What I thought was if an attribute, string attribute, had an extra property that says, auto truncate, and you only used it when you wanted to. The interface idea is okay, but now you're making an interface level constraint, and I don't like that.
So
at the same time, I agree that if the user types something and then it's not persisted, that would be confusing.
Yeah.
Well, in the user interface, you can't type it now, and I think we truncate it also in Turnkey, actually. I think the UI truncates it before it tries to save it. So there's no risk you do this from... I think the reason is also, if you want to have it longer, you can process it, for example, on update, because a lot of truncation shouldn't be just cutting it. It should be actually that you can see that it's longer and then put ... that the end or something like it. So it's been a tricky thing, should we just truncate and then someone could come back and be angry at us because, we've kind of taken away a feature. But as you point out, we could have auto truncate on the model level as a tag value or setting, yeah.
It seems like something that would make sense as a optional feature of an attribute.
Yeah, so in real life, we usually run into truncation issues in programmatic interfaces when we talk to other systems. And we have a contract that says that you're only going to send us 18 characters. And thus we have a field that contains 18 characters. And then we just assume that the other one does what they are contracted or obligated to do, but sometimes they don't. So, and that's an exception. And that should actually throw an exception, because we need to figure out, is the contract wrong? Or did you do wrong? Or did the other party do wrong? So, and that's what the exceptions are for, to raise these kind of questions. Not just to say, well, I think I know what you mean. I will soften the blow. I will just make something up and pass everything along, because that's not precision. But having said that, you're totally free to, and since you have the meta information about how long something actually can be readily available in OCL, you can check this and do a function in your superclass maybe that make sure it's not too long. And then you send in some random attribute that comes from some external source, which isn't the UI, because the UI we check, but if you have it from another REST API or something like that, make sure it's not too long, and then you're fine. But otherwise, it's not. Exceptions are really your friend. They point out where something isn't according to spec, or your spec is wrong. But we need to debug and figure out why this didn't work, and possibly it could be, as you alluded to there, Lars, that maybe since it's trying to save within and this value is still wrong, if I change this in the OnExcept to something smaller that will fit,
yeah, that
would be one way to discover if this is the problem anyway.
But it usually rolls back, because I can have exceptions and then still catch it and save.
So I'm not sure either.
It's a separate memory transaction, I think.
So now it says smaller and came back.
Oh.
So that worked. Let's see what this is. Maybe it's just a one string. So this is what came back. View one thing, on exception executed on thing.
The other one is longer.
And this one was the exception info. Yeah, that's the whole call stack. And
there you can see he's something there that went wrong.
And that
and
was
the length.
664, and so the SQL Server says that this won't do. Yeah, but you have a point there. It should definitely be in a separate transaction to roll the first actions back before trying to save that. But then again, you won't roll it back until you save, because in the on action you might want to actually use the values. Tricky one.
Yeah. In this case, I guess in my case, I've had exceptions not to the data in itself.
Yeah,
I've had
so
exceptions
it was
on what
still
I'm trying to
savable.
perform.
Yes.
Yes, it was still savable.
So this might be a bad case. It would have been better if divide by 0 would actually give an exception.
Yeah, but it's kind of smart of it to say it was infinity, because it's
the double type. Yeah, too smart. Well, time is running up. So,
any questions?
Other than that, please consider to attend MDriven Summit, 16th of March, and Henrik Törnvall, I would love to hear you say a few things about what you do at Finanza.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get some time to prepare, because I'm kind of busy with the other stuff, but I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really need to be super detailed. It's much more to see the spread of the different projects that are out there and what they do. And our newest developer is really, really small. What's her name?
Wilhelmina.
Wilhelmina.
Yeah.
All right. So, thanks for tonight, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully see you in 2 weeks or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great.
All right. Thanks, Hans.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Gracias.